Assalamu alaikum. I don't know. I'm in live, bro. I'm live. Everything is okay. Assalamu alaikum. I don't know. I'm in live, bro. I'm live. Assalamu alaikum. I don't know. I'm in live, bro. Everything is okay. Okay. Let's go and watch this. I don't know about Syrian's rebels because I think I didn't learn about these things. I didn't know about these things. What was happening in Syria? But knew there was a ongoing war between people. I don't know, but yeah, I thought that was all about America, Russia. But right now, I'm seeing many different things that is not to tell anybody, but I need to learn about these things. So this is Asra Rashid. I don't know about him, but I watched a lot of videos from him about politics. Maybe I think he's a politician. Is he? Is he politician, bro? I don't know about that. Islamic. He's an Islamic scholar. Okay. Yeah, let's and he does live stream on politics things. You can see. So this we need to watch this. I don't know about Syria, but I need to know about these things because there there a lot of Muslims live. So they are our
بسم
brothers.
الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمد شاكرين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكرك الغافلون. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today's discussion regarding the Syrian events that have occurred in Syria, the rebel takeover of Halab, Aleppo, as well as the response of the Assad regime and the Russian allies of the Assad regime. So there are a few preliminaries which I would want to cover prior to delving into this subject. Firstly, the common misconception regarding those who analyze such unfolding events as being pure Assadists or Baathists, which is absolute nonsense and conflated, taken clearly out of context. Baathism, which started in the 1940s in Damascus, was founded by Mish'al Aflaq, a Christian.
Bro, it's almost uh 85 years. 85 years. Oh my god. Oh my Allah. I think yeah, inshallah, Khilafah will be established in the next few years. I don't know about that, but I feel it. You feel me? I feel it, bro.
Who found the idea of Arab socialism and what became known as Ba'athism. A Ba'athi is a person who believes in the Ba'athist ideology, which is basically socialism and Arab nationalism. Ba'athists, whether they claim to be Sunni or Shia, whether they claim to be Nusayri, which are commonly known as Alawis, Baathists do not believe in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, prior to Hafiz al-Assad in Syria, prior to him, there were many Baathists who claim to be Sunni, Sunni as in origin. Sunni here being claimed as a term of identity, which is not a term of belief. And these Baathists, when they arrested a Sheikh Hassan Habannaka, rahimahullah ta'ala, Sheikh Hassan Habannaka, one of the foremost leaders of the ulama of Asham throughout the 1950s and 1960s and into the 1970s, well respected. They, in fact, imprisoned him and questioned him multiple times. But what they said regarding Al Quranul Kareem is that the Quran is just a Zahira Arabiya, which means it's just a book of literature that represents Arab culture.
What? We don't believe it. We don't believe it. Quran is the book for humanity, for every human.
The epoch or the peak of Arab literature, and they saw the Quran, they viewed the Quran as a cultural book. So that is Baathism, that is Ba'athi thought, whether it's the Ba'athi, the Ba'ath party in the regime of Saddam Hussein, or whether it's the Baathists in the regime of the Assad family. And of course, post 1970, we've had the Assad regime governing Syria up until the ahdath, the events of 2010, 2011, when the Syrian public, or much of the Syrian public, rose against Bashar al-Assad, the son of Hafiz al-Assad. The position of the ulama was divided between the ulama of Syria. Some of the ulama, they exercised their ijtihad and they said that this is a valid uprising. Many of those ulama are respectable ulama who took that position, and that is what their ijtihad led them to. Of course, there was a Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Sabuni, rahimahullah, the great mufassir of the Quran, a great alim, student of Sheikh Najib Sarajuddin, rahimahullah, of Halab, who took that position, utilized harsh words against his opposition, and that was his ijtihad. Similarly, there were many other ulama, respectable ulama, who took that position. A second group of ulama, they took the position that these ahdath, these events, are fitna, tribulation, and the involvement within these events entails involving yourself in fitna, in tribulation, and they viewed that embroiling yourself in armed struggle against the regime will only exacerbate events rather than bringing these events to an end. A third group of ulama who were more vocal was the group of Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Bouti, and of course his view, many people viewed him as an alim of the regime, a scholar of the regime, and others saw him and viewed his opinions as being pro-Assad. That is how he...
Pro, you have to be pro Islam. Just follow the Allah's rules, not don't don't be hypocrite. Don't use the Islam for people. Use for Allah, for sake of Allah.
His opposition in...
I think I won't be support these types of scholars who tells us, oh, you have to support this government. No, I cannot do that. Even they do the bad thing in their government, so I won't support them, because Allah gives us knowledge about Islam. You have to do this, you have to do that. So I think we should be aware of it, and yeah, and literally Allah gave me a brain. Allah has given a brain to think and implement his law, implement his rule in society. So if anything against goes against Islam, then I'm not gonna support it. I'm gonna uh you know I'm gonna try to I would try my best to get rid of this problem, because through Allah's rules you can bring preach peace. So yeah.
interpreted his stance on the Syrian uprising. So these were three groups amongst the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is amongst the Ash'ari ulama. This is Ash'ari Maturidi and Athari Hanbali ulama, not Wahhabi ulama, not Salafi ulama. Of course, the Salafi movement saw this as a reason to tarnish Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti because of his historical debates with Abdul Aziz bin Baz and his
Or any scholar supports, you know any scholar support, you know injustice, unjust, then literally I'm not gonna support them. If they're doing unjust in society, I will be against them in any section, in any people bring those unjust things, then I'm gonna against them, because that's not fair. You have to be vocal about justice. That's why Allah sent us to this world. You have to establish this justice.
historical debates with Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani. He had a debate with the latter on the issue of Allah Madhabiyya, on conformity to Madhahib. And then you had people like Adnan Ur'ur, who is one of the exiled Salafi ulama of Syria, who disparaged Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti, rahimahullah ta'ala. But these are the three positions that were taken by the ulama. And since then, the events have unfolded. Of course, in 2010, there was something known as the Arab Spring. Many people, a child, if he was born in the year 2010, would be 14 years old now. And if
Oh,
there was someone who was 10 years old at that time, he would be 24 years old. Many of them would be uninformed, unaware of what actually occurred in that period of time. What we have to realize is that from 1924 and just pre 1924, much of the Khilafah, the Caliphate, was divided, and the last real Sultan of the Muslims, a Sultan Abdul
Hamid
Hamid
Khan.
Athani, the second, Rahimahullah Ta'ala.
Abdul Hamid Khan, second, okay. Sultan Abdul Hamid Khan, I love him. I love him, bro. I watched some of episode, those made by Turkish government maybe. So I watched that drama. You can call it drama, but that was very emotional, because he was so much. He was the lover of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yeah, and he was so tensed about Ummah. He was so, you know, he was thinking about Ummah all time, and he worked 18 hours a day. I, I've learned from that, series. You should watch. You can search online. You can find
He died
Sultan
in
Abdul
19.
Hamid Khan. Sultan Abdul Hamid Khan. Okay, Sultan Abdul Hamid Khan. So my uh,
18, when he was removed from his post as Khalifa, as the Caliph, there was the division of the Muslim world. And of course, we had the Italian invasion of Libya, the Mujahideen, led by Umar al Mukhtar, rahimahullah, and the Sunusi Sufi order. They fought the Italian occupation. In Algeria, we had the Sufis led by Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi rahimahullah. In Syria, you had a Sheikh al-Imam Badruddin al-Hassani rahimahullah ta'ala, and numerous other ulama who opposed the French occupation of Syria, of Bilad al-Sham. And similarly across the world, there were different mujahideen that held their positions against the colonial rule. And then subsequently there was the division of the Muslim world into nation states, and that has been the position of what is referred to as the Middle East ever since the division of the Caliphate post 1924. Within the Middle East, we've had the rise of Ba'athism, which I mentioned, and the regimes of the Ba'athi, they never had mercy on their political prisoners. This, of course, happened with the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, that the Ikhwan al-Muslimin were tortured. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, they were tortured and persecuted by the regimes of Gamal Abdel Nasser, as well as the regime, the Assad regime. And this persecution continued with the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt until today, under the regime of Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, as well as the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Political opposition in general, anyone who holds a different political view in the Middle East, the regimes tend to torture them, imprison them, exile them, or at the very least silence them. So in that context, there was a surge of discontent from Tunisia to Morocco to Algeria to Libya, Egypt, and across the Middle East. Within that surge of discontent rose what became known as the Syrian protests. When the Syrian protests, which were actually organic protests, someone who has lived in Syria will be able to inform you that there was mass discontent among Syrians against the Assad regime because of their torture, imprisonment of political opposition. Those are people who have entered interviews in the Kafr Susay Mukhabarat within Damascus. The Mukhabarat have a center headquarters in Kafr Susay, for which there is now, in that area currently, there are reports of fighting within that area of Kafr Susay as we speak, where the Mukhabarat, the intelligence forces, have centers. The harshness, the qaswa of the Mukhabarat, whether in Egypt or in Iraq or in Syria, leads to dissatisfaction regarding any regime, as well as discontent, and generally dhulm, oppression, leads to that. So the discontent was genuine, there were mass protests, and the Assad regime responded by firing live bullets upon the protesters. And this is something, of course, which was a move which led to the armed opposition, which became known as the Syrian rebel groups, and the surrounding nation states took advantage of this. So you had the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, and other state powers that had a vested interest within Asham, Bilad al-Sham, funding and arming different rebel groups. This led to a complex situation from the year 2011 all the way up to 2017. The complexity of the issue was such that in 2014, a man known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he arose not only in Syria but in Iraq. So after the takeover of Raqqa and the takeover of Mosul in Iraq, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he declares himself as Amir al-Mu'mineen. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's movement, which is was known as the ISIS, Islamic State in Syria and Iraq and Syria, at that time,
I think ISIS is terrorist group. They kill innocent people. So yeah, anybody anybody kills innocent people, I'm not gonna support them because that's unfair. That's injustice. Okay.
the acronym was Daesh. And this movement was a breakaway movement from the Al-Qaeda movement led by Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was based in Afghanistan at the time. At that time, Afghanistan did not have any independence. Afghanistan was under the occupation of the United States of America. Ayman al-Zawahiri led the Al-Qaeda movement within Bilad al-Sham, and of course Al-Qaeda cooperated to a degree and worked alongside with groups like Free Syrian Army, which was Western backed. Of course, there was a point at which for every 14 or so dollars that were within the CIA range of budget, $1 was allocated to arm and fund Syrian rebels in Syria to disorganize the Bashar regime, to dismantle the Bashar regime, which was a passageway for what Iran refers to as the axis of resistance. Of course, that term axis of resistance was a response to the term axis of evil of George Bush Jr. After the events of 9/11, George Bush Jr. referred to Iran and other states as the axis of evil, but Iran coined the term the axis of resistance. And of course, there are events in Iraq which occurred post 2003 where Shia militias took advantage of the freedom of movement as well as the freedom since the overthrow of Saddam Hussein to counter any Sunni groups who may have been aligned and associated with the Ba'athist regime, the Iraqi regime. So the complexity of the issue involves sectarianism. It involves the Shia militia from Iraq that did persecute Sunni Muslims. It involves the Nusayri group, which are commonly referred to as Alawis, to which the family of Bashar al-Assad belonged to, originating from Ladikia district, and the long history that some of the Nusayriya have with the Sunni opposition. So those who belong to the Sunni opposition. Why I mention Sunni opposition? Because there are Sunnis who also belong to the Ba'athist regime. So there are Sunnis who associate themselves with Ba'athism, but as I mentioned, that some of them, they may utilize the epithet of being Sunni in the secular sense as identity politics, because Ba'athism does not recognize the Quran as the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, the Syrian constitution, if you check online, you will be able to find the Syrian constitution. You will find Islam as a source of law within the Syrian constitution. That is something that the Assad regime inherited from the opposition to any violation or tampering of that constitution. That opposition was from the Sunni ulama, the likes of Hassan Habannaka rahimahullah ta'ala, and other ulama who, like Sheikh Makki al-Kattani of Damascus, who took a strong stance against any violations of the Syrian constitution. It's not because the Baathists love religion or al-Islam so much that they leave Islam within the constitution. In fact, many of the
I think that is just you know um a sentence in constitution, maybe. I think the in many countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, uh, then Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they also say these things. Okay, I think, but they don't apply those things on society. I don't know why. I think that is called batil, means
mukhabarat
uh they're out of Islam.
are very ignorant of the deen of Allah. The Syrian mukhabarat did not learn any lessons from the Syrian uprising. The harshness towards political opposition continued to this day. It continues as we speak, and the torture in jails does occur and has occurred and continues to occur. Unfortunately, the regime of Bashar al-Assad has not taken any lessons with those uprisings. But having said that, post 2011, many elements became involved in what became known as the Syrian uprising. Some of those elements were from Iraq. Now, since the fall of Saddam Hussein, you had the likes of Awad Ibrahim, who became known, Awad Ibrahim Bakri, who became known as Abu Bakr al Baghdadi, the self proclaimed caliph. Now, there is no doubt that torture of regimes when they torture people, leads to a psychotic mindset of those rebel fighters. So there are many rebels who have been placed in prisons, have been tortured and even raped. It leads to a psychotic mindset towards the opposition. Later, when we observed post 2014 the crimes of ISIS against many different groups, including Sunnis, but as well as non Sunnis, like the Yazidis and others, when they carried out crimes, some of those, many of those rebels may have been the produce of regimes that torture, psychological torture as well as physical torture. And this has happened in the past with various secret services. Secret services, whether that is the CIA, whether it's the MI6, whether it is the Syrian intelligence groups, they collaborate in order to deport individuals, have them tortured in various ways, and then in many cases they are released from prison. So Awad Ibrahim was imprisoned, was tortured, but later became and rose in the ranks of what became known later as Daesh. Now, Daesh was a breakaway from the main rebel movement of Al Qaeda. And Daesh ideologically was tied up to Al Qaeda because Al Qaeda, in essence, is Wahhabi, meaning in its religious theology.
Wahhabi? Huh? Al Qaeda is Wahhabi? I didn't know about that. I think, yeah, maybe. I don't know. That might be happen. Um, yeah.
But Al Qaeda, when it broke away, it was led by the representative of Al Qaeda, who is Al Jawlani. Al Jawlani is the same individual who is leading the current Syrian rebels in what became later known as Hay'atu Tahrir al-Sham. This group, Hay'atu Tahrir al-Sham, the acronym of which is HTS, is the group that currently leads the takeover of Halab. So now we observe the takeover of Halab, and of course the excitement this takeover has given to many supporters of the rebel groups is reminiscent of the takeover of Mosul by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi 10 years ago. 10 years ago, suddenly Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi takes over Mosul, and he leads the Jumu'ah prayer, the Friday prayer, in the masjid of Sultan Nuruddin Zangi rahimahullah. And when he leads the prayer, he dresses up in a garb with an imama and a black garb, and he ascends the mimbar, the mimbar for the
Oh, Sultan Jing. Yo, why I muted that microphone? Wow. Okay, let's watch this. Nur al-Din Jingi, the light of the faith. Wow. I think Sultan Salahuddin Ayubi raised under him as like he was the father. He didn't know about that until he knew it about his life, what happened when he was born. Ah,
Salah, what is known in English as a pulpit, but the mimbar is the correct word. And he gives a khutbah regarding mujahideen.
but what happened and is happened in Palestine is cute compared to Syria. Even praying and fasting punished by death as a Sunni Muslim in the Syrian military. That's if you're lucky. Lucky? Yeah.
And regarding that the mujahideen, after fighting in the way of Allah, they have declared the caliphate. That is the excitement that gave to many factions within the Al-Qaeda minded individuals, or those who are affected by Al Qaeda ideology. There was an excitement. Of course, this issue is much more complex because, firstly, we have groups associated with Ikhwan al Muslimin which must be disassociated from Al Qaeda in terms of
Yeah, yeah. I think for this one group, no, one not, three, four, five group, maybe ISIS, Al Qaeda, for them, they're doing, you know, they kill innocent people in many place. They did it, but yeah, they are terrorists, like terrorists. May Allah guide them.
ideology and how they view politics or how they view the region. But there are also various factions. There are, in fact, secular factions. So currently, as we speak, there are Kurds that are cooperating with the rebel takeover. Those Kurds are supported by the United States of America.
Yeah, also, America made Al Qaeda, ISIS, maybe I don't know, but yeah. But the Kurds means Kurd. I don't know about that Kurd. There was the Kurdish people was there in Syria, Iran, Turkey, and Azerbaijan maybe. But I think who who made ISIS? I don't know. Founder of Abu Musad al-Jarqawi. When did IS fail? ISIS fail. ISIS fail. Hmm. Who supports ISIS and Al Qaeda? Qaeda. Several groups have supported ISIS and Al Qaeda, including the Assad regime. The Syrian intelligence agencies helped build up Al Qaeda in Iraq, which later became ISIS by providing cover for a terrorist pipeline that ran through Syria into Iraq. What? Oh my gosh. Okay. Tehrik Jihad Pakistan. No, it's not. Why that? Okay, okay, okay. The two organizations differ on the main enemies, strategies, tactics, and other fundamental concern. I think is USA support ISIS? The Islamic State group self-declared caliphate was defeated in 2019 by the US and the regional ally Syrian Democratic Forces. I watched a video about you know uh ISIS or Al Qaeda. They say, and it was an American man. I don't know, but maybe politician. He said it. USA created this group for their personal interest in those region.
So the Kurdish groups that operate within rebel held areas are actually supported by the United States of America, but are currently cooperating with the rebels who have taken Halab, or most of Halab, or whatever regions of Halab. The claim is that they have taken the citadel, which is within the middle part of Halab, as well as Al Jami' al Umawi, the Grand Umayyad Masjid within Halab. But Hay'atu Tahrir al-Sham was formed after the disunity of all the rebel factions. There was a point in Syria when there were hundreds of rebel factions operating all against the Assad regime as well as one another. So, as I have mentioned, the three distinct positions of the ulama that were taken, many people confuse my position as being Assadist in nature, which is false. The condemnation of all regimes must be consistent. Condemnation and speaking out against all regimes that carry out torture in all its forms, as well as imprisonment of political opposition, must be condemned, whether it's from Morocco all the way to Pakistan and anywhere else in the world, whether in the Muslim majority states or in the non-Muslim majority states. Having condemned that, there is a position that views the current tribulation as exactly that which is tribulation. Now, I address firstly those people who are internet warriors here in the West, who are within the Anglosphere, who speak the
Internet warriors.
English language, and they address myself and others who take my view and adopt my view as being Assadists, people who glorify this violence. Those who glorify this violence do not take the guidance of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Sallallahu alaihi
What was the
wasallam.
guidance of the best of creation? That the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is one body. When one part is hurt, it is as if the other part, the rest of the body, is hurt. Now, when Assad's soldiers carry out acts of oppression, that hurts all of us as Muslims. But similarly, when the rebel fighters carry out acts of oppression against Muslims, that is also hurtful to the Muslim body. But what I want to point out is that Al-Jawlani will not establish the Khilafah. Al-Jawlani, the Al-Qaeda associate, will not re-establish Al-Khilafatul Islamiyah. Not in any way different or distinct to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In fact, their actions lead to the killing of more civilians, more innocent people. As we speak now, the Russian planes, this has given a reason now for Russian planes to carry out acts, bombardment of rebel-held areas. And some people, they attempt to compare the Palestinian resistance with the Syrian rebel groups. Now, there is no doubt that the Syrian regime has carried out historically acts of what would be deemed as acts that violate human rights, international law, or any law, whether it's Islamic law, our law, or whether it's any man-made law. There is no doubt that the Syrian regime imprisons political opposition. But the state of Syria prior to the current uprising can nowhere be deemed as being better or having improved in any way or form. Having lived in Damascus, many of the Tulab al-Ilm who studied there would know that the freedom of study, dirasa, as well as Islamic activities was more under the Assad regime than ISIS, for instance. So you had Daesh burning the books of Al-Imam Ahmad bin Zaini Dahlan, prohibiting Sunni literature, violating the freedom of Sunnis. Now I utilize the term Sunnis excluding the Wahhabis. I do not include them within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It is only the Wahhabis who glorified their actions, or Wahhabis who are ideologically aligned with Daesh or with Al Qaeda. Of course, the Daesh is Al Qaeda on steroids, and Al Qaeda is an offshoot of Wahhabi ideology. But having said that, the Syrian rebels who were Sunnis, many of them had joined FSA, Free Syrian Army, and many of them had joined various different resistance or rebel groups or rebel factions. But those rebel factions disintegrated, and the dominant factions, the Alpha factions, became those Wahhabi factions in the post 2010. That was the reality on the ground. It was after the bombardment from the sky, meaning with air power, that the movement of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi disintegrated. He was killed in some tunnels, and then
Sometimes my brain is processing it's too late. I don't know how to relate it to this situation and many name of some scholars, some leader. I can't. Bro, I can't remember that. Why?
the ISIS group, they announced a successor. Of course, some of the successors were killed, and to this day, ISIS keeps announcing a new caliph. These are typical Khawarij group. While I mentioned the Assad regime is a typical Ba'athi, Baathist regime, a secular regime, the rebel factions led by Al Qaeda or Al Qaeda Al Jawlani, they would fall under typical Wahhabi leadership. What does that mean for our position? That what we observe today is fitna to Sham. What is fitna to Sham? Fitna to Sham is that both groups are guilty of having killed innocent people. The Assad regime as well as the rebel factions. And those who glorify these groups from the internet or romanticize with regard to rebellion, they are not the ones who have had their homes bombed, their families displaced, young children being charred by Russian planes. When those Russian planes carry out the bombardment, they do not discriminate whether this is a supporter of Bashar al-Assad or whether it's a Sunni or whether it's a Shi'i or whether it's a Baathist or whatever label people may apply to these people. Those bombs, they char young children, people who live here, and glorify rebellion, glorify taking up arms, when they do not have the clear ability to overthrow those regimes. Now, what must be made clear, we know Hezbollah is backed by Iran.
Yeah, we
Iran is the
know, we know,
backer
we know.
of Hezbollah. And similarly, Iran backs the group in Yemen known as Ansarullah and other factions. But who is backing the current Syrian rebels? That is a critical question that must be asked. How can you fight a sitting government, a government with an army, without the backing of a state? Which state is actually backing the Syrian rebels? Is it the Turkish government, a NATO ally, the Turkish government which has interests in Syria, like creating a buffer zone to allow Syrian migrants who have migrated to Turkey to return them back to Syria? So by creating a buffer zone, they return all those Syrians back to Syria, because Erdogan in his policies in the past has had no concern for human life, whether it is those policies in Libya, whether it's his policies in Iraq, where they bombed Kurdish areas, where Kurdish areas are bombed by the Turkish army, and similarly in North Syria. So, is it Turkey
Correct.
that backs the current Syrian rebels? And previously, some of my critics online, they have said that it is a conspiracy theory to deem the current rebels as being supported in some way by the what they refer to as the Israelis, by Mossad. That is not actually conspiracy. If someone done their research, they would find in the past that Syrian rebels were treated in Tel Aviv. They had treatment in Tel Aviv. So this current invasion of Halab, it comes at a time when Gaza is at a critical point. So some of the critics, they said that the rebels will act in Palestine, but they cannot currently act in Palestine because they do not share a border with what is referred to as Israel, which is absurd because from the year 2011 to the current time, within that time period, there was sufficient time as well as expansion of Syrian rebel groups that had taken control of regions that neighbored what is referred to as Israel. In reality, it is occupied Palestine. And these rebel groups did not act against the Israeli occupation or the Jewish occupation of Palestine. They did not act against them. So, how to interpret that is that these mercenaries, some of these mercenaries, we do not know who actually pays them, who pays their wages. These mercenaries acting out in Syria as they did post Daesh, many of them. If you remember, Daesh was at one stage, their mercenaries were robbing banks. They even demolished historical graves, like the grave of Sayyidina Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anh, the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is buried in Raqqa. They placed explosives on the entire shrine and blew it up. Of course, Wahhabis will have no problem with that. But that is deeply offensive to the Sunni Muslims, to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that this is a violation of our history and our historical sites. But they gave total disregard to this because they claimed that they were spreading Tawheed. And of course, historically, this is how Wahhabism actually spread within the Arabian Peninsula. Historically, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and the three waves of Wahhabism, or the three waves of the Saudi family within the Arabian Peninsula, they spread through violence and through the sword. They would not spread through debate or munaqasha ilmiya. They only spread through actual violence. So, as we speak now, there are current updates. I will read up some of the updates. But prior to doing that, I will take some of your questions from critics alike and respond to you, insha'Allah ta'ala. Someone asks, do Donma Jews rule Turkey? Now, the Donma is in reference to the followers of a Jewish Messiah from 1666 who took refuge in Ottoman territory, in the Ottoman Caliphate. And they settled mainly in Salonika. It is claimed that Ataturk was a descendant of these Donma Jews. Someone asks, with regard to the hadith, لعن الله اليهود والنصارى اتخذوا قبور أنبيائهم مساجدا. So, with regard to this, he asks that Allah cursed the Jews and Christians that they took the graves of the prophets as places of worship. This means salah is prohibited behind a grave. You cannot do sajda towards a grave. You cannot do ruku' to a grave. This is totally prohibited. If there is a grave, it must be covered where people cannot approach the grave for ibadah. That is the meaning of the hadith. Someone asks, do you think this is an opportunity for Israel to take Syria?
Maybe.
What they refer to as Israel is not actually powerful enough to expand itself because they do not have the sufficient manpower. But what this does is further weakens the pathway that by which arms was supplied to Lebanon. So the pathway from Iraq gave, if Russia or Iran supplied arms towards resistance groups in Lebanon, the pathway to that was via Damascus. And this weakens that line of supplying weapons. So it is only in Benjamin Netanyahu's interests that Syria be weakened. Someone asks, they ask, are these groups Sunni? Now the answer is that Al-Jawlani is not from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He's Wahhabi, he's Najdi. But there are Sunni rebels involved. There are Syrians who are Sunni because the default group in Bilad al-Sham is Sunni. But there are many foreign Wahhabi fighters who lead the way, and they are the most aggressive from all the groups, and they dominate all the rebel groups. Someone asks with regard to Izzuddin al-Qassam, rahimahullah, he was a resistance fighter that was shaheed in the mid-1930s, and in fact he took fatwa from Al-Imam Badruddin al-Hasani, rahimahullah. So someone asks with regard to these groups that you have mentioned, why don't they fight Israel? And I did mention this. Many of their trolls attempt to respond to that by saying that they have no border with what they refer to as Israel. But the reality is, in the past, they have had a border, and to this day, none of those fighters entered Lebanon, for instance. And surprisingly, with regard to what they refer to as the white helmets, there was no real presence of the white helmets in Lebanon. Suddenly, now that events are unfolding in Halab, the white helmets have reappeared. So these white helmets that claim to be humanitarian groups that count the casualties, they resurface in Syria, but they never show themselves in Lebanon. Why I mention Lebanon is because we can accede the point that they cannot enter Gaza, but they are nowhere to be seen in Lebanon.
I'm a little bit confused about this conflict. I need to learn more about these things, bro. I'm gonna leave right now. I don't know. I spent 39 minutes here. 1 hour maybe? I don't know. Yeah, almost 1 hour. Okay, goodbye. Assalamu alaikum. May Allah bless them all. Assalamu alaikum.